Let's just see whether this thing works. Does anybody know? That's it, okay.
Vooruit, achteruit of 4 op klikken.
Okay, it's just like driving a car. You go backwards or forwards or whatever you want to do. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this short lecture. I was very honored to give the invitation because many eminent people have gone before me, much more eminent people than myself. On the academic side, I particularly feel a little bit nervous to follow Mr. Hofstede, Ralph Duirendorf, an ex-boss of mine at London School of Economics, Bram de Zwaan, and on the political side you've had your heavyweights as well. So today, perhaps a bit more modest person talking about Europe. I suppose I'm the son of an English mother and of an English father. That makes me European, but then again the Brits have not always been the most staunch Europeans. I've worked, and I still have jobs in Munich, in Germany. I've worked 5 years in Italy. I've worked for many years in Vienna. And I've worked in many parts for UNESCO. I was many years in Paris. So I feel myself more European than anything else. But that's not sure that qualifies me to give this lecture. However, I will try to do my best. And I've tried to be not too too much focus on economics. I try to also put a bit of fair share of what I call political science. Now, undoubtedly there will be political scientists in the room, and they will think, well, maybe that's not quite so good as it is, but I'll do my best. So it's really a mixture of political science and a mixture of, so the spectacles I'm wearing tonight are the spectacles of a political scientist, the spectacles of a pragmatic politician, and the spectacles of a professional economist looking at Europe and where we need to go to. So let's look, where the hell does it go? Well, I don't know. Page down. There we go. I thought I'd show you the man because I suppose I'm known quite a person in politics as a fairly celibate man. And this was known, he was a very devout Roman Catholic Christian French politician, as the Burgomaster already said, Prime Minister and a minister. You can see he looks a bit dour, but he was from the post-war generation. Together with German colleagues, he wanted really to work a lot on reconciliation of France and Germany. So he was really also that became known as the Schuman Plan, later became the European Community for Coal and Steel. And later on he can really be seen together with Monnet as one of the founders of the European Union. And he is the man we honor today. Not a very, you know, not sure whether you would have a lot of fun with him, but obviously this is the man we're talking about, and this is the man on which shoulders I stand and I admire a lot. The people of that generation, like in our country, the generation of Lubbers, Baron Biesheuvel when he was still alive, Wim Kok, when they talked about Europe, and I will not do that today, but I will say it, is that they say that Europe is really all about never having this horrific experience of the Second World War again. So for these people, the whole argument for Europe was, we will not have war again on this continent. Therefore, it's very sad that I was a member of a cabinet where my Prime Minister, Wim Kok, had to resign about Srebrenica and the war in former Yugoslavia, because the enormous cock-up we made in the Netherlands. And I am also responsible for that, because at that time I was a member of the cabinet and the whole cabinet resigned for that reason. The lesson for which I had is, it was the main reasons for people like that to say we will never have war again in Europe. Little did they know, we had it in Europe and we needed the Americans to clear up the mess in our own backyard. So one of the first things I start on before I start on my lecture proper is that one of the main tasks, namely safety and security on the European continent, we have been unable to look for it because of insufficient strength in the spheres of defense or in the spheres of foreign policy to prevent those gruel events that happened in former Yugoslavia, that we could not prevent it, and in the end we needed the help of others to clear up the mess in our own backyard. So what would somebody like Schumann have said about that episode? That's what I first think of. Now, most of today, I will not talk about that. I will take that as given, not because I don't think it's important, but because I want to focus on other things. Those arguments, never war again, are not the arguments that are of foremost interest to younger generations of Europe. So I take it as important, but I'm not going to focus on it today. I want to focus today on how come that Europe has become so unpopular. How come it's become almost politically correct to basically take the piss out of Europe? How come it is that if you say, well, I'm a European, that you might as well say you're a child molester, but that is not really, it really doesn't go down very well. And that's not even only true, as I will show later on, for extremist parties on the left or extreme parties on the right, but it's even bon ton to say that among the established parties in the center. So if there's something bad that needs to be done, you blame Europe. So I'm trying to understand also something about institutional reform and what's necessary in Europe. Remember, Europe is getting larger and larger and larger. We're getting more and more countries becoming members. More and more countries want to become members. So we also have a problem with policy gridlock. So this makes the problem I talk about even more urgent. So I'm going to delve a little bit before I start. How does Europe work? How does the Parliament work? How does the Council work? Has the Treaty of Nice done anything about it? And I'll gradually move on to more economic topics, and then I move back to politics again, because in the end, it is, of course, a political question. So let's start with something. That was the title, and this is how you go backward. So I think we could argue that the European politics doesn't really prove to be very fascinating for the electorate. In a sense, European institutions, as they are at the moment, are completely unfit to govern and enlarge Europe. We know from literature on committee decision making that if you have more than 7 people around the table, you can forget making rational decisions. I've been involved on European councils for culture, and it's impossible almost to make decisions. There's an enormous problem of gridlock the more countries you have. So we need further reform of European institutions. Then I wanted to say something about maybe something positive, maybe, if you want to say. It used to be the case, you could argue the success of Europe could be that we don't vote along national lines. For example, I might be left-wing, or I might be Christian democratic, but I might have left-wing brothers in Germany or in France or in Italy. And am I more likely to vote along with my left-wing German and Italian brothers than to vote along with my with my Dutch friends in the parliament? So do you vote more along national lines, or do you vote more along party lines? So I'll just show you some evidence of that. So for example, this is what we call an agreement index for the European Parliament as a whole. Well, it goes up and down and down. There's less and less agreement, so there's more debate, if you want. That's how you can interpret it. But I'm more interested to show you this. And this shows something about the average relative cohesion of European party groups and member states. So what it means that it's going up, if you look at party states, is the cohesion of party groups, that people are voting more along social democratic lines, or along green lines, or along Christian democratic lines, or along anti-immigrant lines, rather than voting Dutch, Italian, French, or German. So whereas in the old days, in the European Parliament, this is based on very detailed voting records. So we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of votes over the last 30, 40 years. So this is the result, what I show you, of a very detailed empirical research, which I don't want to bother you with, but the bottom line of it is to do with people like Gérard Roland, Hicks, Simon Hicks from the London School of Economics, Gérard Roland from the University of Berkeley. But what the line is, people are voting less according to national allegiances and more along ideological lines. So I would have thought that might be quite good. You would have thought, well, that's not so bad for Europe. That sounds quite good. Now, nevertheless, it seems to be the case that for all kinds of reasons, if you look at detailed statistics, which I'm not giving you at the moment, that European politics doesn't seem to resonate with British citizens, or with British citizens, we knew. But increasingly, the popularity of the European project has never been so low as it has been today. We see that with the appalling turnouts at elections, that people just simply do not turn up. Very low turnouts, much lower than the national elections. And we see that in the total unfamiliarity of the names, with the names of European politicians. People very rarely know their members. Okay, we now know Wim van der Kamp, because isn't it great that Wim van der Kamp, if only Berlusconi would have put all his women in the European Parliament, all the beautiful women, and we've got Wim van der Kamp. And the most amazing thing is that the guy is one of the funniest guys I know. He's not renowned for his beauty. He's renowned for his sense of humor and his sharp wit. And he's not even renowned so much for his heterosexuality either. So then, what better person to put against Berlusconi than Wim van der Kamp? So that was just one plug for somebody who was not of my party. But normally, I mean, why I'm saying this, making a bit of a joke about it, is that normally people resort to the weirdest kind of things to get people there. But it really just does not resonate. When you go to the pub, or when you go at the school grounds, or when you go at work, people do not talk about European elections like the way they did when Obama was fighting, first with Clinton, and later for the presidency to get a thing. That was a real big fight, and that's something which you really miss. It's not personified, it's not really on the table. Okay, so here is a picture of a town most of you know. Which town is that? Nice. Nice is very nice, like the British say. So there was something called the Nice Treaty. So here you probably can't read it, but for those of you who can read it, these give what I want you to take home from this table. It shows you the weighting Nice gives to the votes of each country. So it shows, so normally you think, well, why do we worry about it, you think? Well, the way we worry about it is because typically small countries used to get an enormous large number of votes, relatively speaking to their population or to the GDP, compared with large countries. So for example, the Netherlands has 13 votes, Romania has 14 votes. Well, that's half as much as Germany. But Holland is 5 or 6 times as small as Germany. So Holland gets 3 times as much votes, so we as Dutch get 3 times as much votes as Germany. If you're Luxembourg, it's completely ridiculous. They get 4 votes. You say it's not very much, but if you look in terms of the percentage of the population, they get a huge amount of votes. So it used to be the case before the Nice Treaty, or under the Nice Treaty rules. It was even worse. It's getting a bit better. So what we've been trying to do is more votes for bigger member states. So one whole idea of the enlargement project was to try to readdress this balance, because otherwise the support for the European project would lose ground with the large states. Of course, that meant that you had to give more votes for countries like Poland and Turkey as well. So really, the Nice Treaty reallocated votes from the smallest to the biggest member states. Now look carefully what I said before. The small ones, even after Nice, get a disproportionate amount of votes. So before it was even much worse. So this already looks too reasonable for the small votes. You almost feel embarrassed being Dutch. But anyway, that was the whole idea of the Nice Treaty, to reallocate votes from the smallest to the biggest member states, compared with the arrangements under the Treaty of Rome. Now, there's a very clever game theorist. It was a big project, a Finnish guy called Mike Wittgren, a good guy, and he came a lot to us, and also in the Schumann Center where I used to work in Italy. And he uses a lot of game theory, and that suggests that adopting the double majority voting mechanism, which is the one prescribed in the Lisbon Treaty, will, when you compare it with the Nice Treaty, give the large member states much more power, while existing and new small member states lose power. So the idea is that the Lisbon Treaty has been designed to strengthen the grip of the big European incumbent states. That was the deal. That's the idea. Which is strange in a way. I mean, it's understandable, but it's also strange because it's not that strange that you hear a lot of squeaking and a lot of hissing and humming from the smaller states, and that's exactly where this came from. You often hear about reform of the treaties, but this is really what it was all about. So there we see something, and what do you think that is? It's the European Parliament. I think a Dutch architect might have done a better job, but that's the European Parliament. So, what's happened to the European Parliament? The European Parliament has always been slightly pathetic. The European Parliament is a joke from a democratic point of view. If you go back to Plato and all the others, the people where, who really know about democracy, basically the Parliament was a Parliament without teeth. So one of the things I wanted the new treaty to do, even though it was rejected, I'm not suggesting that the Dutch or the French rejected the new treaty because of these reasons, but one of the things I wanted to do is to make sure that the European Parliament gets much more teeth vis-a-vis the European Council of Ministers. So let's look at that. So my argument is that using that same theory, that the game theory predicts that the Lisbon Treaty will not do much to give the European Parliament more effective power relative to that of the Council. So the new voting rules we have and the new mechanisms we got in place in the Nice Treaty, according to the best research I know, would really give the larger member states more power. Yes, true, but it's still very unbalanced, is my conclusion. And secondly, we see that although the European Parliament was meant to get much more power, when you talk in terms of effective bargaining strength, this is something which we can make more operational in terms of game theory, the effective power of the Parliament hasn't really gone up as much as more. And that has to do with the fact that the Council still has most of the power in something which is called the Conciliation Committee. Since that has not been there to attack, on paper it looks like the Parliament has been given more power. If you play the games either in a laboratory or in a game-theoretic sense, you see that the European Parliament has not been made stronger relative to the Council of Ministers, so most of the powers. It has not become democratic. The democratic deficit is still there. It may even become a bit bigger. Now, the Lisbon Treaty does give the European Parliament more power via what is called legislative co-decision. Didn't they not have that before, you'd ask? I mean, Gert and I, we've been both members of Parliament. The whole point of being a member of Parliament in The Hague is that you can make your own laws. And did you not make one of your own laws? Or, yeah, I think, I can't remember what it was, but it was a very important one. I'm not trying to be flippant, but that's one of the things, when you're in Parliament, you think that's the most important thing you can do. Because and then in actual fact, in the Dutch Parliament, like in any other Parliament, the highest level of authority, you may not look at it, is the Parliament. Parliaments can send ministers home, parliaments can change bills, they can make bills, they can do whatever they want. That was not the case and is not the case in the European Parliament. So how can you take those suckers serious? Okay, so now they've got a bit of extra power to draft the budget. You think, didn't they have that before? Why the hell did we have to do a whole new treaty to give them that? But the problem is, of course, that the Council of Ministers, the ministers, so these are, for example, all the ministers of finance, all the ministers of transport, all the ministers of the environment, all the ministers of health, they have a monopoly in setting up the resources. So in a sense, what we predict and what is actually looks like is happening is the reform will lead to more conflict between Parliament and Council. But it's not clear that it will give the Parliament extra power. So I'm sorry I'm going to go from some of these details, but I want you to understand why the European Parliament is in such a sorry state. It's not just that we're all anti-European, there's also a reason for it. So let's talk a bit more about this democratic deficit. So here's the democratic deficit. Now, this democratic deficit, we have all kinds of things which need to be done. So when we used to say that, and it's still the case, 80% or 90% of laws come from Brussels. So then you should feel really pretty small and pretty humble when you're in The Hague. But it doesn't feel like that. Now, why is it? What happens if a decision is made in Brussels? Then it has to be transposed, is the terminology which political scientists use. It has to be written into Dutch law, German law, all the Danish law, English law, Greek law, all the different countries. You have two types of transposition. One is called secondary transposition, and that means that you transpose European decisions into national laws, national rules, national bills. But the secondary transposition, that implies it's only done by the executive branch of government. by the cabinet of the Dutch government, or the German federal government. Whereas primary transposition occurs when national parliaments introduce a new law. They have a big fight in the national parliaments, defend it, and then it gets transposed. Now, what we see is that more than 90%, I've got detailed tables, but I won't bore you with that, but almost all of transposition of European decisions is done by the government without discussions with the national parliaments. So I would think that that's not really going to help very much in making Europe speak to the people in the countries themselves. That really widens the democratic deficit. I was myself involved with that, and only later on do you realize when you grow older how stupid you were. That we had, for example, one of the biggest ones was called the Stabiliteitspact and the Stability Pact, which was extra rules over and above the Maastricht Treaty for the 3% rules for the deficit of the government and the 60% rule for the government debt. That was just a decision by the Council of Ministers, and it was more or less taken over, and it was hardly discussed in Parliament. The whole introduction of the euro was felt by the citizens. They felt it was theft by night. That's how people felt. People were really completely surprised. Are we going to go to €1? It was not internalized in Europe in national politics. So although all these inside people in Europe were at it, and also the financial spokespersons, also Gerrit Salm, we were all involved with it, but we just forgot to inform the people. And then suddenly this euro came, we had a few months left there. No wonder people don't like the European project. Another reason, maybe, which we should realize when we talk about Europe, is that so far, and I make no apology for that whatsoever, the two main successes of the European project have been thoroughly neoliberal. So they have been foremost, and that's huge achievements. I cannot add that strongly enough. The first one is that it used to be that Europe was all closed. We had borders, you could not import or export, there were huge tariffs and there were lots of barriers. There's now one big common market. When I was a young man, when Gert was a young man, hard to believe, but he was a young man once. we would go to the supermarket and we had a choice between Goudse kaas and Edam kaas. Now, you can get anything. You can get Margaux, you can get Gorgonzola, you can get all the German cheeses, the very, very good British cheeses. And this was something which was when you were a child, that was just not there. So that created enormous extra welfare, because economists believe that people have a love of variety, that having this extra lots of variety of products adds to your welfare and makes people happier. That leads to more competition, leads to lower price, lower costs, and leads to, generally speaking, a higher level of economic activity in the European continent. And particularly what we've seen until the crisis that we'll talk about separately, we've seen that the poorest countries, so think of a country like Portugal, or even a country like Ireland, Irish people used to come here to work. And because it was such a God-forsaken country, where you would call a country of paupers. No, it's the richest country of Europe. They caught up. So what you see, that is one big economic region, fueled also by the introduction of one common currency, led to enormous integration of trades, of goods and services and labor and capital, which boosted enormous economic activity and gave the poorest member states enormous opportunities to catch up. And that's exactly the reason why all these new small member states from Eastern Europe were very poor. They want to be able to join this big, big market, to export their cheap products, to catch up, and also get a slice of the cake. And not only want to get a slice of the cake, they also want to make the cake bigger. And that's the big, big success of the European project. Now, the political landscape is divided into those who think this is enough for Europe, and those who think there is more on the agenda. So those who say this is enough are what you call in Holland the liberals. Well, I like liberals, so I would call them the market-oriented conservatives, or whatever, the VVD. And nothing wrong with it, but they say, that's enough, no more that to Europe, no more extra countries, we've got what we want, let's focus on that. Europe is an economic project. Then you have, on the other end of the rainbow, you have all these people wearing goat hair socks, and eating muesli every morning, and they say, well, we want to have social policies for everybody, we want a basic income for everybody, we want environment and things like that. And then there's a whole spectrum in between. So for example, that you see that the biggest problems this planet is coping with today, so of course the financial crisis, but think also of the development crisis in developing countries, think of the climate crisis, think of the food crisis. These are all there and they will not go away. Think of the problem of terrorism, think of the problem of migration and integration. These are big issues which can only be solved on a pan-European level. So I'm a strong believer, and I hope that it's not a political statement, because I see colleagues also in the Christian Democrats, in the Greens, in the Social Democrats, and even in the VVD, to be honest, who says, yes, Europe needs to be there. Because if you do a tougher environmental policy on your own, then you just basically drive all your own business into bankruptcy. But if you do it all together, then you might have some chance of doing it. No country wants to do climate change policy on its own, but if you do it all together, it will work. So really, many of the biggest problems which are public goods, and these are not economic things, these are things to do with international solidarity and intergenerational solidarity. So development, climate change, terrorism, migration, being kind to strangers, these are the things where Europe is still very much needed, and exactly those terrains is exactly why Europe is screwing up and not delivering the goods that it should be delivering. So let's talk a bit more first about what kind of reforms are needed. I already had a fierce discussion with Jo Ritze over dinner, is the director of the chairman of the university, and memorizing the Koch report. Koch has nothing to do with my anatomy, it's the former prime minister. He did a review for the European Commission, and the review was the Koch report. I don't have to say this to you, but I had to explain this to my British colleagues who never read anything European. So anyway, and they did a very thorough report. It didn't get enough attention and showed that the Lisbon objectives, where Europe should become the most dynamic, the most competitive, and the most knowledge-based economy in the world, have completely failed. From the 70s onwards, America is like that, productivity. Europe was like that, and gradually it's been catching up. And then in the last 5 years, it's been moving away again. So the catch-up has moved away. So really what's been going on, really, is that here you could catch up by just replicating existing technologies. So you could catch up by basically focusing on Netherlands' main port, transport, logistics, just having just boring old Gouda cheese, and just making lots of it and pushing it through, and then you would catch up. But the view of most economists is that the closer you get to the world efficiency frontier, the most efficient part, then you can only survive by very much competition, a lot of innovation. You must innovate. It's like Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, wonderful book. And there's, remember the Red Queen, remember that? And the Red Queen, she would move as far as she moved, she would not move ahead of the rest. She would only stay at the same place. She would walking, running and running and running, but she would still stay in the place. So you have to innovate, and you have to compete, just not to lose your position. So that's why I think that lots of reforms are particularly still needed on the Lisbon objectives. I think particularly that, and I can say this in this university, that if I look at Europe, where expenditure per student is half of that in the United States, that we really have a problem. We need to double budgets for universities, and that needs to be paid for partially by students, partially by government. We need to have much more funding for research and development, and we need to have a much tougher environment for innovation. If you don't have those, and we need much more reliable financial systems. Now, many of these structural reforms, I'm also referring that there are some reforms which need to be get rid of, like the agricultural policy. They are blocked by what we call vested interests. And also, I think the current climate Because now all the cities have gone wrong. I will talk about the climate crisis in a minute. Now we can all be socialist again. That's a danger. Eh? So, of course, I'm a social democrat, but you can be kind of a socialist without a brain again. Yeah, because we've had this crisis. It was the fault of all these money grabbers, the city. It was the fault of all these markets. So now we must forget about competition in markets and things like that. So we do it all by the state. It's very dangerous, including, if I may say, critical of my own minister, Wouter Bos. It's completely ludicrous that he owns interest in some of the biggest banking conglomerates of the world, and they are still part of the Ministry of Finance. He should have put it at arm's length. He has not done it. So these people going dizzy in their eyes, we can all be socialist again without, no, Wouter has a brain, obviously, but I mean, but I'm trying to say you have to be careful not to get carried away. And that's what seems to be happening now. So the current climate is not conducive to further reforms. And yet structural reforms are badly needed to maintain our place in the world economy. You see also China and India, and particularly also to give useful opportunities for the growing army of second-generation immigrants on the labour market. So let's talk a bit about Europe. There is something which I would call a Brussels-Frankfurt consensus. Brussels is where the European Commission is, Frankfurt where the European Central Bank is. And there the argument is that further reforms need very tough stance on fiscal deficits. That's always been the case. You need to have a tough reputation. If you're tough on, cut spending, cut the deficit, then you will also be seen to be a tough guy. This was really il duro, Gerrit Salom. Then you will also be credible on doing further reforms in the labour market. What we see, of course, with the global financial crisis, that also in the Netherlands, that the government has lost any sense at all of even the whole economy is flat. Is one moment you can actually do some reforms, and all these free reform boys, so there's the Rauwvoet and Balken and Bos, they've been sitting in a little tent, playing with each other, and they come out of it, and what do they say? Well, we'll ask Mrs. Jongerius whether we're going to raise the retirement age, and we're going to not attack the mortgage tax reduction. So all the things, see, why is it so important? In a crisis, billions and billions and billions of euros are being used to bail out banks and to boost demand. That has to be paid back with interest in the future. So you want policies now, reforms now, that don't give you money now, but give you money in the future. What is more obvious than raising the retirement age? So I would have gone I would have called Mrs. Jongerius and Mr. Rinner Khan in, and they said, look, we're going to do this. We're going to raise the retirement age and get rid of the mortgage tax reduction. Can you give us an advice on which people should be accepted from it? Should it be the agricultural workers, welders, whatever, but not to give an open advice. So what we see here is that people are getting weak in the knees and not daring to do the reforms that they all know are necessary and are even more necessary today than they were 2 years ago. So at the same time we see that the global financial crisis, and I've worked on 3 programs, één vandaag today, tomorrow and Saturday, so please look at it, has exposed a failed and often corrupt class of people with exorbitant pay, which are no longer tolerated by politicians and electorates. I'm not just talking about this corrupt and overpaid class in private banks. There we know it. But we see it also, as we've been talking about, in building corporations, in many other semi-public organizations. So there's something which we need to think about. So really, when I think about this whole set of problems, I think the global financial crisis means we may actually want to do a little bit more on reform. One, because everybody understands that you're doing it now. It gives you the money in the future you need to do to pay out and bail out all the debt you're incurring at the moment. There's the credibility argument. If you do it now, everybody would understand it. And also the bit I said about the corrupt class. So you have to take responsibility, you need a strong government now. Now, look at this. Now, do you know all what they are? The chap on the left is, I suppose, is Obama. The guy on the right is the president of Russia. The president of Russia. What's his name again? Exactly. And the guy in the middle is the guy who likes women. Now, why do I put this picture is that we had, I want to say a bit more about the global crisis, because it's relevant for Europe as well. The global crisis is a problem between Obama and Russia. It's a problem between Obama and China. So let me try to say what I mean. I think the G20 was an error at an astronomical scale we've never seen before. So what is the problem for the crisis? What has gone wrong in the world economy? Of course, for many, many years, we had cheap money, low rates of interest after the dot-com bubble, started by the Federal Reserve, taken over by the Bank of England. So in these countries, they had very cheap cost of borrowing. So what have they done? They borrowed like hell. They were all like there was no tomorrow. In all the British and American citizens. Bush saying like all these people with bad financial records, who normally are all blacklisted, no, sell them houses, because then they might vote Republican. So that's what they did. It was all, and then of course there was a huge bubble. Share prices went up, house prices went up, and eventually, and then all the crap was of course put together in special subprime packages, being sold to our rather naive pension funds and other banks, and in the event that got the whole world economy in a problem. But think a bit deeper behind it. The world really consists, and then what does the G20 do? Say now we have a recession, so we must all pump money into the economy. Cut taxes, raise public spending, a very Keynesian way. You remember what Keynes said? Build the Vondelpark, build the Amsterdamse Bos, even if you asphalt it over, it doesn't matter, but just get people to work, they will spend money, and the economy will start rolling again. So that's what everybody's doing. That's the spirit in the G20. But there is an underlying problem which is much more important. Why is it that Britain, and particularly America, have been able to live beyond their means? It's because China and Russia have been able to finance it. So think of the ludicrousy in the global economy. China is a very poor economy. Russia is, by all intents and purposes, quite poor relative to the richest country in the world, America. They've been funding this borrowing bonanza of the Americans like hell. So they've been putting money, saying, you borrow money, we'll buy it up, we'll buy it up. So now China is all loaded with American assets, scared stiff that they're becoming worthless, which would happen if the dollar collapses. And the whole thing is completely fragile. So normally, and then think of it then, China being poor, Russia being surplus countries. So they produce more than they consume, they save. Holland, Germany are countries that are saved more, have huge surpluses. So normally what you would argue, if G20, if they would have done the right thing, is to say, what? America and England, they will live beyond their means, they cut spending, raise taxes, and you're a clever guy, Obama, if you get Germany and Holland and China and Russia to increase spending, to spend more. But China has based her whole economic model on having export surpluses by having a cheap currency, an expensive dollar, to be able to sell cheap to America. Eventually that will be unsustainable. So the pressures for the fragility of the global financial system have only been increased in this G20. I'm not the only one who is saying that. More and more people are saying that, but it's not a view that was heard very much at the top of the G20. So I think the inbuilt, Russia was doing it because they have all this gas. So they have an overvalued currency, which is bad for the non-gas exports. So they've been willing to buy up American assets as well, to have a cheap currency to America as well, to be able to export in the non-gas sectors. But the point is, the global imbalances have not been readdressed, have not been addressed in the G20. If anything, they've been worsened, and worsened at a gigantic scale. So I think, despite G20 promises, fears of protectionism will not only remain, they will be fueled. Yep. It's Jules Bertrands from the Parole. Another one. Well, just, I thought after a while you get a bit bored with me, so a few pictures. So now I move back to Europe. I think I want to put to you the case and think about it. And I think many people say it, and indeed the Burgomaster already referred to it. So I can be quick on this. My main message is, for this part of the talk, is that the EU has failed to deliver where it should and made us too much where it should not. So, for example, there's this Irish guy. A few years ago, well, not completely as a joke, because politics is never a joke, but I had some ambition as a younger man to be European Commissioner. Now, thank goodness they appointed Neelie Kroes, who was very good. But I must admit, when I see this guy called McCreevy, who is the successor of Frits Bolkestein, he's an Irishman, a very neoliberal Minister of Finance of Ireland, and he is Neelie's colleague. He's dangerous. He should be hanged up by the balls from the ceiling and everybody should be able to throw darts at him. He's the biggest culprit on Europe. He's been saying the last 4 years I've been seeing him in the various debates, no, there is no need for pan-European supervision, the market will sort it all out. So, and then of course now the G20 has said that Europe will take a leading role in having also European financial regulation, and now somebody says, oh yeah, no, now we do it of course. But the guy, Europe has failed to deliver, they've been against it, they've been pulling the car backwards rather than pulling the car forwards, and they've got a disgraceful track record on that. Europe has been not absent, but too absent. We remember this lovely man, who you probably never heard of, but he was a colleague of ours, Gijs de Vries. Has any of you heard of Gijs de Vries? He looks like a colonial administrator, but a lovely man, married with an English wife, and one of the nicest VVD'ers I know, and he was made big European job. The job anybody, Gert, you would be the ideal man for it. You know, I'm not trying to get you away from Maastricht, but I mean, but it was the anti-terrorist Tsar of Europe. Well, it was a complete failure because he couldn't get the information from all these intelligence officers from all around Europe. We couldn't even get together an information sharing system at a pan-European level. You look completely ridiculous. And that was what, so Gijs eventually handed back his portfolio and said, forget it. I already talked about former Yugoslavia and what I feel was a big disgrace, but of course I have responsibility as well in an implied way. Climate change, we're not doing enough. So there Europe could have taken, on all these things, could have taken a more forceful initiative. These are also things, immigration, anti-terrorism, climate change, which are by nature political. These are political topics. People disagree on whether you should do something about the climate or not, or about migration or not. So how come that Europe is unable? Europe is no longer about one currency or one market. Europe is about these topics, about financial supervision, about climate change, about pollution, about terrorism, about migration. These are all inherently European topics which cannot be dealt with at the national level, must be dealt with at the supranational level, preferably the global level, failing that at the European level. And how come we should ask ourselves also as a political class that we are unable to make that exciting and to make that kind of, that everybody talks about it. At the same time, this is a bit facetious of me. I personally think a bit more than my own political party. I've been Minister of Culture, or what they call it Minister in Europe, but I'm not sure whether, okay, one little thing. European cultural budget, 80%, 70% of the money goes on overhead. Do I need to say more? I think not. Culture, a lot of the subsidiarity principle, which many of you have been studying, says that it should be put at the lowest possible level, and if there are many taste differences, in culture it's typically where there are taste differences, it should be done at a local level, not at a pan-national level. If there is a taste difference in Holland for working very short hours, for having holidays all the time and having a relaxed lifestyle, then I don't want Europe to tell us that that's wrong. That's our prerogative. But the second bullet, these are all pan-European prerogatives. So I'm saying that the more you make the set of tasks for Europe more compact and more political, then it's easier to make Europe a more project. Now, I'm coming to an end. Political spectrum. So left and right. Well, left and right. And then there's something in the middle. But it's a bit like that. The left and right-wing populists are doing very well. And these regular parties, they're all shitholes. They're not doing very well. So why is that? It's strange because most European citizens, we have lots of surveys, detailed polls all over Europe. And then even these funny Swedes, they all support standard fiscal federalism arguments. So they realize that Europe is important. what people do get peeved off about, that the violation of the subsidiarity principle, the ones I just talked about, really has undermined support for the European project. So all this stuff I talked about here, we know from surveys, which I haven't got time to talk with you about, that people really, that is really contributing to the democratic deficit, is really contributing to people losing interest in the European project. We know that from detailed survey evidence. But throughout Europe, Euroscepticism is fueled by the rise of populist left-wing parties. Think in the Netherlands Socialist Party. They oppose neoliberal reforms. That's how part of the nay vote was. They said it's all neoliberal project, it's one currency, one market, they're all bastards, it's bad for the poor people. That's the rhetoric they had. And then on the other hand, you had these right-wing parties like Fortuyn and others who defend national sovereignty and identity. And it was those who were really cannibalizing the support for the European project. Think carefully about the causation. It's not those parties that are causing the anti-European sentiment. It's the anti-European sentiment that's causing the rise of these parties. Be very careful. I mean, don't, or at least leave open the possibility which way it goes. I think it is extreme parties benefit from the anti-European sentiment, and there is, may I say, light econometric evidence for that. And let me put this as my feeling. Because the research I've seen for that is weak, I feel. But I think, I want to believe that. So here you have some of these parties. So the right-wing parties, you have the Vrijlige Partij in Oostenrijk, Kost Vlaams Blok, the Danske Volkenpartie, the Front National, the Lega Nord, Wilders, I should not forget. Funnily enough, the Conservative Party is in all this research, always comes out there. And on the left wing, you have the Socialistische Partij, we have the Vänsterpartiet in Sweden, and the Miljöpartiet de Grona, that's the ones I know. Ireland, very famous, the Sinn Féin and the Green Party. It's those parties which are doing very well. So this gentleman is also doing quite well, and he's then one of the right-wing guys. But I put him down here, this young man, because he's not just a Dutch phenomenon. It's a phenomenon we see throughout Europe. Not just Austria and Denmark. There are other Geert Wilders around, maybe not such a nice haircut, but they are around. So the old argument in the favor of the EU, I've already said in the beginning, failed to impress. So actually, in fact, they turn around. So if you now look at trying to understand why people vote certain things, we have what they call, well, detailed panel data studies. For those who have studied sociology or econometrics, but let me try to give you the result of that. What we find that those people who are worried about an exclusive national identity, Limburgers, or about economic anxiety, the anxiety of becoming unemployed or disabled, and particularly a dissatisfaction with national democracies, all of these contribute to Eurosceptic sentiments and can be cued by populist parties. So read what I say. They can be cued by populist parties. That's why the causation goes the other way around. The old arguments in favor of the EU, never war again, they don't really work anymore. That turns out the research. They fail to impress populist parties, and they also many young Europeans. A little by the way, I think a cordon sanitaire, which you've seen in the Flemish part of Europe and sometimes talked about in the Netherlands, I think will be counterproductive, but that's a separate discussion. So what we also see from these studies, that there is a class thing. I'm very lucky to be in Nuffield as well in Oxford, and there's a guy called Goldthorpe, who was one of the most eminent sociologists in his life. I mean, he's a very good guy. And we talk a lot about class and status. In Britain, class is not the same thing as status. Maybe you know this guy called Prescott. He's this big fuck, and he's kind of the deputy prime minister, and he's a big working class man. He's really pissed off because he will never be upper class. He may be deputy prime minister, but in England, you can be working class. I suppose Ruud Vreeman, he would like to, of course, he's a burgomaster of Tilburg. Okay, maybe not Maastricht, but it's Tilburg. But he will always want to be seen as a working class guy. Maybe he's the closest we have to it. But there's a difference between class and status, so we have to remember that. It has also to do with merit societies. But what we find, and that's the point I want to say here, is that the unskilled workers from Central and Eastern Europe, And the higher income workers, the richer earners in the older member states, France, Germany, Italy, our countries, support the EU. So what you find, so it's funny, so us, the higher educated, the higher income people, you, we support the EU, but it's the unskilled workers in Central and Eastern Europe. While the manual workers, so our working classes, and the civil servants in the older member states, they mistrust the EU. This is not a statement, this is fact, based on detailed surveys and detailed empirical evidence. So the EU has eroded social protection in France and increased it in Britain. So the European Union has led to more social policies in Great Britain and less social policies in France. So it's not so surprising that the left-wing British support the EU just as much as the right-wing French citizens tend to support the EU, because that's the way it goes. While the right in Britain, the left in France attack the EU. It's exactly for that reason. So the popular legitimacy for the European project is low and falling, and will get worse due to the perceived democratic deficit. But it's important to look at the different segments in society, and there are different segments in different societies. In France, it's very different from Britain. In Eastern Europe, it's very different from in Western Europe. So the contingent being for or against Europe depends on your class and depends on the country you come from. Maybe that's as much as I'll do for that. Now, this is democratic deficit. So, coming to my last two slides, we have what I want to focus. So, what have I learned so far? It's just as an amateur looking at the European project. Then I see something like, okay, the European institutions suffer from a huge democratic deficit. It's not really on the minds of the people. It's not in the minds or in the hearts of the people. And for good reasons. Part of it is that if Europe is just an economic project, that's not going to appeal to the hearts of the people, is it? If it is seen to be a closed shop, that much of European legislation is done behind closed doors, or in just the government and not in detailed debates with the parliament, it's not going to warm the public to it. If we see all the things I've mentioned, that there are still many tasks left for Europe to be done, which are different from the tasks which Schuman was concerned with which Wim Kok and Ruud Lubbers were concerned with, but are the new tasks, the new generation. There's a nice book by Jeff Sachs on the on the globe, on the global problems, which you should all read. But all those problems about the climate, about pollution, about famines, all that stuff are people which I think when I talk to younger people, typically are much more in their hearts and minds. And these are things which really deserve a European agenda, and the old cast of politicians is not delivering the goods. So what do I really would like? Well, what can we do perhaps? So let's try to be a bit pragmatic. I think we need an open political think of America, where you had this wonderful months and months and months campaign of Obama, and then he finally won. It was great. Nobody thought he'd win. Clinton could have won. The Republicans could have won. But then all the issues were discussed. How come we don't have that in Europe? Don't you think that's weird? So we have some kind of basically, I mean, I think even the provincial elections are more exciting than the European elections. And so there is something, as Hamlet would say, there's something very wrong in the state of Europe. So we need an open political battle between rival parties about things that matter for Europe. And we have to get rid of backyard politics among non-elected elites. And things will get worse while European politics is more necessary than ever before. People may indeed no longer want structural reforms, although I differ on that, but you can explain it. But Europe is needed to tackle all the issues I've talked about: climate change, pollution, integration of minorities, global financial crisis. We need a more compact and different set of tasks for the EU, in line with the subsidiarity principle, and a much, much, much bigger focus on policy delivery. I don't know if any of you have ever read the statements coming out of, for example, the Lisbon Treaty. They look like Stalinist plans. They look like we shall do that and we shall do that, we shall get so much percentage there, so much percentage there. It's all top down. It's really written by French civil servants. It's not what I would call the bottom up kind of stimulation which we like from Scandinavia, which the Dutch are traditionally good at and the Brits are good at, but which is not a tradition in Italy and in France. So we need to have a much bigger focus on incentives and a much bigger focus on policy delivery, with also testing how we've, not the inputs, but have we actually succeeded and passed it? And that's too little of that. So the political reform, to resolve the severe policy gridlocks, we need to move the EU from a consensual to a partial majoritarian system. We need to make, and this is, I can go quickly, I can talk for hours on this, but I think most of this is known to you. We need to make European politics more transparent, more accountable, and more appealing. And here I come, I think that the President of the EU should personify the EU and should be elected for 5 years and be nominated by the big pan-European parties in the European Parliament. So what I think, for example, is the Christian Democrats, if I were them, I would persuade Angela Merkel to say, you go and run for president. And not first have the elections and then once, and if you win, and I would suggest that the social democratic parties would find also a very appealing figure, not Tony Blair, but somebody else, who would actually really go and have a good fight with Merkel, and then maybe a third person as well, and they would have fight weeks after weeks after weeks. How it's done at the moment is that all the parties do a handjeklap, and then somebody comes out of it, and then they choose the only reason I was a candidate when Nelly Cruz was appointed, that was a joke to get things, well, it was, of course, I desperately wanted it, and I committed suicide, but I didn't become it. But the idea was also to have an open and transparent thing, but our Dutch government was not even prepared to talk about it in the parliament, let alone to have an open campaigning procedure. So I thought, well, maybe, but of course it begins with a real campaign for the European presidency, and then they can have the power and the legitimacy which Obama has. Obama's got power and legitimacy, because he's won this election. He's made American politics kind of alive and kicking, and can I say, there's enough reasons for European politics to be alive and kicking. So we need to go over it. And I don't care whether it's Angela Merkel or whoever it is, or even Balkenende. I would. So that means I'm finished actually. So the Commission should become more politicized. The European president should be elected not for 2.5 years, I think, but for 5 years, a longer period, because 2.5 years is just too short to be able to have an impact and have a serious thing. And then we could look forward to a lively campaign. I see Jo, who's going to chair the debate and the discussion, looking slightly, but only slightly, impatient. So this is a good moment for me to stop with a design for the... Does anybody know who this is? Yeah, but who designed it? Does anybody know it? It's the most famous person outside the Netherlands. It's not Balkenende. What's our most famous cultural person outside of Holland? It's an architect. You're close. Rem Koolhaas, exactly. So he did a whole set of designs for the European Union to give it a bit more exciting flag. But that's something we need to do something about branding Europe as well. That's maybe the only thing we can learn from Tony Blair. Thank you for your attention.